Morning, Year 4. As this is the last chapter of the book, I'm not going to be asking you to do any written work about this today. But you can follow the story along as I read it. It's one of the longer chapters, and then at the end, maybe you can reflect on it, say what you think about the whole story. So, all for today, you're just going to enjoy listening to the story or reading along with me. So, chapter 2 is How King Arthur Became Lost in the Forest and Overcame the Knight Enchanter, and how Sir Gawain finally became a noble knight. So, we're starting on page 133. Sometime after this, King Arthur himself craved some adventure. As Queen Guinevere and her court were away in Carlion, it was time to go. Taking only a favourite esquire, Boisnard, with him, he set off. After getting lost for a while in a very dark wood, the two came upon a great but grim castle. A light was on inside, and when they knocked, a porter appeared. We are a worthy but weary knight and esquire, Arthur said. Maybe take shelter here tonight. If you know what's good for you, the porter replied, you'll sleep in the woods. No good comes to knights who seek shelter here. This made King Arthur curious, and he insisted upon coming inside. The porter led Arthur and Boisnard into a room where a lively party was taking place. An old knight sat at the head of the table. He had a white beard and a broad chest. Around his neck he wore a chain of gold with a locket attached. He invited the men to eat. For dessert, the old knight invited the men to play a game. In a contest of courage, he explained, each competitor would try to cut off the other's head. That seems like a strange sport, Arthur said, and everyone in the room burst out laughing, as though in on some shared secret. Are you afraid? The old knight asked. Arthur angrily replied that he was afraid of nothing, and, against Boisnard's pleas, he agreed to play. And, as he was the guest, the old knight insisted that Arthur must swing the sword first. Still angry, but satisfied to be going first, Arthur drew Excalibur, swung, and, with remarkable ease, lopped off the old knight's head. Well, that's that, he said, thinking that he'd won. But, to his surprise, instead of falling, the body of the old knight walked calmly over to where his head had landed, picked it up and placed it right back on top where it was as good as new. My turn to swing, the old knight said, and everyone watching laughed again. The old knight swung once and then twice, but each time stopped just short of hitting Arthur's head. He moved his sword slowly a few more times, pressing the tip just slightly into the skin of Arthur's neck before stopping. Cut off my head if you're going to, Arthur said, but torture me no longer. I would do something else entirely, the old knight cried. I will spare your life for a year and a day, if you promise to come back at that time for your beheading. Arthur promised. And I will spare your life again at that time, the old knight added, if you can give me the answer to the following riddle. What is it that a woman desires most in the world? Arthur sighed. Now the old knight was really torturing him, for who knew what women really wanted? Was it wealth, beauty, pretty things, the power to please? Nevertheless, making Boisnard promise that Guinevere was not to be told, he agreed to the challenge. A year passed, in which, despite asking almost every woman he had come across during that time, Arthur felt himself no closer to knowing what women wanted. Still, as promised, he set out grimly to return to the old knight's castle and his possible death. Just before he reached the castle, however, Arthur came across an old woman living in a hut built in a mossy oak tree. The poor thing was horribly wrinkled and ugly, with filmy eyes and ears that flapped, and only one tooth left in her mouth. Still, Arthur greeted her politely and made one final attempt at getting the answer to his riddle. I know the answer, the woman said, but I'll only tell it to you on one condition. If I guess right, you must promise me that I can choose any knight in your court to become my husband. Arthur hesitated, not sure that he could make that promise for another man. However, realizing that the only other choice was his death and that his noble knights would do anything to prevent that, he agreed. That which a woman most desires is to have her will, the old woman said. That which a woman most desires is to have her will, the old woman said. So what that means is to have her own way, what she wants. She also told him that the old knight was an evil magician who'd played this game with many men and who was able to win every time because of the magical gold locket around his neck. When his head fell off, his life went safely into the locket. That was the secret behind the trick. When Arthur got to the old knight's castle, the first thing he did was recite the old woman's answer to the riddle, word for word. The old knight blinked, and Arthur knew that the answer was right. The next thing Arthur did was to reach out and take hold of the magical gold chain and locket. Now, old knight, Arthur said, perhaps we can play another game in which you give me this chain and locket around your neck. Arthur pulled hard. The chain broke and the locket opened, revealing a shining ball of crystal that held the old knight's life. Arthur flung the crystal ball roughly onto the ground, where it broke. At this, the evil old magician broke as well, finally falling down dead. Arthur was eager to get home. Stopping at the old tree hut, he gently gathered up the old woman and set her carefully on the horse in front of him. At all times during the trip, he treated her with the greatest respect, as though she was a beautiful young queen instead of an old woman. When he arrived home, everyone watched in silent confusion as Arthur told of how the old woman had saved his life and about the promise he'd made her in return. Was I right to make that promise? He asked the knights who stood before him. All the loyal knights who were present told him he was. Upon hearing this, the old woman looked the knights over for a while before lifting a bony finger and selecting Sir Gawain to be her husband. As all watched sadly, Gawain walked up to the old woman, took her hand, and pressed it to his lips. The old woman was taken and dressed up in clothes fit for a queen, which, in the minds of all who saw her, made her look even uglier. The old woman and Sir Gawain were then married in the church of King Arthur's court. While he was doing his best to do his duty, the proud Gawain secretly suffered. After the ceremony, Gawain went into his room and stayed there, wanting to be left alone. By nightfall, however, he realised he was behaving badly, and he was being rude to his new wife. He went to find her and to apologise. I accept your apology, she said. Now, it's so dark in this room. Why don't you go get a light? Gawain returned carrying a candle. But when he approached her and the circle of light fell on her face, he saw before him not the old woman he'd married, but a lady of great beauty with long black hair, eyes like black jewels, and lips like coral. Who are you? Gawain gasped. I'm your wife, she replied. I was only old and ugly because a spell had been cast upon me, but your kindness in marrying me has set me halfway free. Halfway? Gawain asked. Yes, I must still remain old and ugly for half of the day, but I'll let you choose what half. Gawain replied that he didn't care what others thought during the day, and that he would prefer she was her real beautiful self at night, when alone with him. But his wife replied that she'd rather be beautiful during the day, so she wouldn't have people laughing at her. Well, then, so be it, Gawain replied. You're my wife and I respect you. You shall have your will in this and all other things. His wife laughed, admitting she'd only been giving him one last test, which he had passed wonderfully. She explained she'd been one of the ladies of the lake, but that she had loved him since watching him bid goodbye to Sir Peleus, and that for his sake, she had become human. Gawain invited everyone in the court to come and bring lights and refreshments. When they arrived, they were overjoyed to learn what had happened and to meet Gawain's true new wife. So let this be a lesson to you. Just as Gawain's wife at first appeared to him to be something awful, so often does one's duty. But once one has committed himself to his duty, as a groom does with patience to his bride, then so often does that duty become beautiful. I do pray you may find yourself as worthy of your duty and as happy as Sir Gawain. Another time I shall tell you the story of some other excellent knights. But for now, I bid you goodbye. So that is the end of the story of King Arthur and his knights. Well, in this book, anyway. So, just spend a few minutes reflecting on the book, which has been your favourite part, which bit maybe have you not enjoyed so much. Did you like how it ended? What did you think of all the characters? You can write some ideas down if you want to, but you don't have to. And tomorrow we'll be answering some questions where you have to think really closely about the whole book. So I look forward to our lesson tomorrow. I shall see you then.